He is the keeper of the houses of the dead, and the summoner of the spirits of the slain. He forgets nothing, and he knows all things that shall be, save only those that lie still in the freedom of Ilúvatar. He is the Doomsman of the Valar, but he pronounces his dooms and his judgments only at the bidding of Manwë. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. While I originally planned to do a different video today, I remembered right before the making of the script for this video that Halloween is the day after the release of this video, so I figured I might as well push my original video back a week and do something a bit spookier. Happy Halloween, everyone. Today we are talking about Mandos, in keeping with our recent deep dives into the Valar, and he is the ruler of the dead and the pronouncer of dooms in Arda, in Tolkien's works. For more information on this character, please check out the articles and videos in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me. Let's begin our tale. Mandos, whose real but lesser-known name was Namo, was in existence since before the creation of Arda, being one of the Ainur thought into being by Ilúvatar. He did not play a notable role in the music of the Ainur or the creation of Arda, for his realm of power was to be far more abstract than the elements of the other Valar who descended upon the earth. Mandos was the keeper of memory and wisdom, having knowledge of the fates or dooms of Arda and its peoples and works, only insofar as he was given such enlightenment in his time as a Vala by Ilúvatar. In a way, he was also the speaker and judge of metaphysical rules, dooms, and prophecies, knowing if they had been broken or enforced in the world. Concerning his amount of knowledge about the future and fate of Arda, I cannot be entirely sure. Certainly it was less than Eru, who was the only one to know for certain the full fate of Arda. And perhaps the Ainur who remained outside of the world of Arda knew or foresaw more than he. More than Mandos, for some events were yet in the control and freedom of Eru, which were not even revealed to Mandos. However, besides Manwë, Mandos best knew the mind of Ilúvatar, of any in Arda, and has always been allies with Manwë due to that fact of a shared knowledge of the will of Ilúvatar. His pronunciations of fate, his prophecies in a sense, are given only with the permission of Manwë. Mandos was the grimmest of the Valar, yet shared not in the evils or darkness of Melkor. Rather, the weight of duty and knowledge and doom seems heavy upon Mandos, and in his personality he was simply stoic and grim, not delighting in nor vengeful in the pronunciations of dooms and fates. Now this actually presents a strange conversation regarding the autonomy and free will of Mandos, for, as we will discuss more later, he sat in the Council of the Valar, giving judgments and opinions for the events in the early history of the world, but to what extent he actually had a bias or had desires towards a particularized goal, I am not sure. What I'm really saying here is, I do not know how much free will Mandos enjoyed compared to other Valar, or if the stoic nature of his personality was simply the result of the entity he was, or if Eru made him just far less autonomous in his nature, as he required the permission of Eru more directly than others to fulfill much of his role as a Vala, both in pronouncing dooms and governing the dead. I'm not sure, but this is part of what makes Mandos quite interesting. Regardless, we know that the Ainur were created from the mind and will of Ilúvatar, and that they had their uttermost source in Eru. Perhaps all of the Valar are aspects of Eru, and perhaps Mandos is simply the aspect of fate and governance of the dead from Eru. Upon entering Arda and becoming more corporeal, his siblings, as they were Irmo, the Vala of visions and dreams, and Nienna of pity, mourning, and courage. Namo and his brother Irmo were considered to be the Feinturi, the masters of the spirits of Arda. The wife of Mandos was Vaire, the weaver of the time of Arda. In establishing themselves in Valinor, the halls of awaiting were created. They were named Mandos, meaning the castle of custody in Quenya, and usually Namo, whose name means judge or ordainer in Quenya, was actually simply called Mandos for his halls. His halls were the place where the souls, or Fëanor, of those whose physical forms were slain came, at least for the children of Ilúvatar. For elves, the firstborn, these halls would act as a place of rest for their souls until such a time as the Valar decided to re-embody them and give new hor for Fëanor, bodies for spirits. Elves were indeed immortal and forever bound to Arda, for even in death they remained in the ring of the world. Some elves remained for shorter amounts of times in the halls than others, as the more valiant were reincarnated sooner than those with more wicked intentions. As for dwarves, they were set in halls apart from those of the elves, perhaps awaiting a day in which they could aid their father Aule in rebuilding a new Arda. As for men, they would seemingly pass through the halls of Mandos, going thereafter to a mysterious place outside of the world, of which perhaps Mandos and maybe Manwë knew something about, but was perhaps only known by Eru alone. Now, as I do with all my epic character histories, we will discuss the major moments in which Mandos was involved. However, there is a level of uncertainty I must establish for myself first. During all events in which he played a role, large or small, I do not know his level of agency or knowledge, understanding or power. Even a small line of dialogue or his mere presence might insinuate something that is beyond the scope of this video, but has greater implications within the realm of Arda, or some sort of fate to be. It's something to think about. In one of the earliest recorded moments of the pronouncements of Mandos, when the world was still dark in the lands far off from the two trees, Mandos and Valinor, with the permission of Manwë, claimed that though the coming of the firstborn was yet some time off, that time would soon approach, and it should be that the elves would awaken under stars and love Varda most of the Valar. After hearing this, Varda would go forth to create the stars, using the dews of the silver tree Telperion. After the war for sake of the elves, or the War of Powers, Melkor would be captured and imprisoned in the halls of Mandos, from which none in all of Arda could escape. In these halls, Vaire and Miriel, the first wife of Finwë of the Noldor, would serve and play their parts as well. Furthermore, concerning the coming of the elves, when the Valar decided that the elves should come to Valinor to live there, Mandos spoke, "So it is doomed," meaning that this early judgment of the Valar changed the fate of elves and Arda forever. Again, it is a small line, but Mandos remarked it as something quite important, which we'll come back to. Later on, with the release of Melkor, Mandos stayed silent, perhaps knowing what was to come, but saying nothing, as he was not commanded to by Manwë nor Eru. Mandos would judge Feanor for his actions in pulling a sword upon his brother Fingolfin, and gave this elf his punishment of banishment. Mandos would also be present during the council in the wake of the destruction of the two trees, knowing first of the murder of High King Finwë before any other, having felt that that doom was handed out, and he accepted the words of Feanor and the doom which was to come for the elven kindred and the Valar alike. Feanor went on his path of vengeance, first victimizing the Teleri at Alqualondë, and after this, and one of the most important events for the character, Mandos himself, or one of his servants, went forth ahead of the host of the Noldor who journeyed to Middle-earth, and he relayed the pronouncement of the doom of Mandos, also called the Doom of the Noldor. If these elves continued on to Middle-earth and did not repent for the kinslaying and return, whether they took part in it directly or not, their works would come to ruin in Middle-earth, and they who endured in Middle-earth and came not back to Valinor would wither and become as shadows of regret before the men who lived there, tying back to the doom that Mandos foresaw in simply inviting the elves to live in Valinor many years before. Again, there is a certain power in oaths and dooms and curses in Middle-earth, something that ties them from age to age and from Vala all the way to the simplest of hobbits, but I talk a little bit more about this in another video. This doom of the Noldor was tied to the Oath of Feanor and the fate that followed it. Finarfin, half-brother of Feanor, and those who followed him returned to Valinor and they repented, but the others went on. Indeed, during the First Age, the Noldor would find that the doom of the Noldor was held true, as their works, no matter how mighty or great, all came to naught but ruin in the end, just as Beleriand itself did. Whether or not this doom found its end with the forgiveness of the Noldor and pardon at the end of the First Age, I am unsure, as even the future works of the Noldor in Middle-earth would, in the end, fade from the world in ages hence. Later in the First Age, the most famous moment perhaps concerning Mandos occurred after the deaths of Beren and Luthien. Luthien would come to him in his halls and sing a song, a lamentation of the sorrows of love between her and her love Beren, the life that they had not had, and the differences in the dooms of men and elves, which was so powerful that Mandos would be moved to pity in a way that he had never been nor would be again. Mandos consulted Manwë, who in turn was given an answer by Ilúvatar himself concerning the fate of Beren and Luthien. Mandos gave Luthien a choice, to remain in Valinor and forget the griefs of her life and love, or she and Beren could return to live mortal lives together in Middle-earth, and she could at length take on the gift of men, which was death. She chose the latter, opting to live and die with Beren. A similar and final known event mentioning Mandos explicitly is when Eärendil and Elwing came to Valinor near the end of the First Age to plead for aid against Morgoth. After the coming of Eärendil to the Valar, Mandos asked the others whether men should be allowed to step foot on Valinor and yet live. However, he was half-elven, to which Mandos replied that even the elven part of him was still of the Noldor, who were still under the ban of the Valar and were not supposed to be allowed to return. However, with this, Manwë's pity and compassion moved him more than the logic and dooms of Mandos, and the Valar chose to help the peoples of Middle-earth against Morgoth once and for all, leading to the War of Wrath. But Mandos was not wrong, and Eärendil and Elwing would actually never be allowed to step foot on mortal lands again. That did not mean death, of course. Concerning the rest of the history of Middle-earth and Mandos' place in it, I can actually only say little, as the powers of the West took a decreasingly active role in the history of Middle-earth as the ages went on. I do imagine that, along with ruling the Houses of the Dead, Mandos would continue to pronounce dooms to the people of Valinor about the happenings in Middle-earth when it was necessary to do so, and he saw the future of Middle-earth more clearly than others did. While the Doom of the Noldor was known as the first prophecy of Mandos, the second prophecy of Mandos, which was the Dagor Daggerath, the last battle at the end of the world, perhaps would or would not come to pass, as Tolkien later abandoned the idea of the marring of Arda by Melkor ever being fully healed. And so we come to the end of our tale about Mandos, the Doomsman of the Valar. From Mandos and his dooms, we see that actions, large and small, all have their consequences in the greater fate of the world. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this epic character history on this fascinating yet mysterious Vala. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on Mandos and his realm of doom and fate? He presents many interesting philosophical inquiries, themes, and tones in the legendarium at large, and yet I do wonder if Tolkien would have continued to revise Mandos in his notes, along with the other changes he had already made to the character to better fit with his later thoughts on the Silmarillion and the lore of the history of Middle-earth. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles through the link in the description below, or check out our merch or Patreon. Thank you so much to our Valar tier patrons, Peter Shepard, Jonathan Putin, Mark Kralik, Blair Scouten, Merton, John Hume, Sam McBee, Matt Sabach, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Adam Petrolik, Brandon Glidden, Molly Sullivan, Daniel Burns, Anthony Harmon, Dorwin Gray, Arthur Merlin, DJ Vaught, and Dale Davis. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. The support means so much to me. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I will see you all again next Sunday with that video on the tale of how Arnor and Gondor were almost reunited, but they lost their kings instead. The one I originally planned for today. Happy Halloween, everyone. You all are the best, my friends. Thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.